First, it's a wonderful place. I like simple things. Then I like very much the place, and you know, it's a bit risky. I feel at home, and the danger is that I can talk too much. Please stop me if this will be the case. I will try to control myself, but any case, at any case, please intervene. I'm an architect based in Istanbul. We are not a big practice. We are up to 10. And now that I have another office in Strasbourg, France, I'm mainly based in Istanbul, but I'm traveling a lot. The name of my lecture is hyper-specificity. Well, hard to pronounce it, but I did some practice. Instead of trying to explain theoretically or conceptually, which are the things I'm not feeling very comfortable with, I would like to show just an object, a daily object that we have in Istanbul that explains at the extreme my architectural tendencies and what I mean by being hyper-specific. Well, we are in Istanbul at the Golden Horn. You know, we have a couple of bridges. At the Galata Bridge, the daily life of the city, you see people fishing. And I was born in Istanbul, and this is one of the traditions, daily traditions of the city that I like very much. And this object, this kind of apparatus, instrument, that helps to fix the fishing equipment to the balustrade of the bridge is something that I would design. It's an anonymous design, but so simple that I really am jealous about the designer. As you can see, these are two wooden pieces and a rubber, just a rubber. This is something designed specifically to fix the fishing cord to the fishing rod to the Galata Bridge balustrade. It's in a way a sustainable design because the sheet of rubber is a former a former wheel, a tire, yes, a section of a tire, and the small piece in triangle extruded from one extremity is fixed to reinforce the joint. Then, in a way, nothing is waste, and it is useful. And there are two alternative positioning of the equipment. One much more horizontal, and in this case, much more vertical. Then, over the years, I realized that this is what I am trying to do when I design a building or a space, because we all know that the only way to create a space is not always to build. This is what I call hyper-specificity, being hyper-specific to the site, to the budget, to the production amenities, to time, to program, a series of things. Then I'm not that kind of architect who wants to create every time a strange and a new form. I like to work with familiar things that everybody can work with, but to achieve at the end with something really new, unfamiliar. Then I would like to show you the B2 house, the one which I designed more than 11 years ago. It's a tiny house in a village at the Aegean coast of Turkey. I was asked to design not a house, but a place to stop for a businessman. He was, and he is still, a very busy businessman, traveling all around the world, and he asked me to design a place by saying that the brief was very short. He said, "Han, I would like to stop there. Look at the view to the Aegean Sea, listen to the music, read some book, spend some days, and then back to Istanbul." The distance of the village to Istanbul is roughly 4 hours. Then 2 hours and a half by ferry, and then another 2 hours and a half by car. Then it's not far away, but it is a critical distance to take the control of the construction phase. I always try to start working together with all the parties right from the first moment of any project. I'm not that kind of architect who creates things and oblige engineers and other disciplines, other parties to obey him. That's why I like to dialogue with people. And I think it's the easiest and rational way to do something better. That's why I was mentioning the distance to Istanbul, because right from the beginning of the design, that was a crucial data for us. Considering the scale of the building, it's a building doing 6 meters by 10. This is the village, and the house is at the very right extremity of the image. Is it a bit flu? Is it sharp? The image is sharp, or, well, okay, if it works for you, it's okay. Maybe then I have some vision problems. Well, it's a tiny building making 6 meters by 10, and my client asked me to do the minimum possible. I'm not a minimalist, guy, but he said the minimum of maintenance I would like to have, if possible, no maintenance at all, and just one piece for living and 2 rooms, and that's all. Then the budget was restricted. Even the budget was without any limits. I always have the tendency to spend the right money for a design. I don't believe that to spend a fortune will guarantee good architecture. Then, being conscious that this will be a tiny house built by the local builders. This is another issue because it's the capacity of the builders are not a big deal. They are guys from the village. And knowing that our site visits will not be as frequent as we could do in Istanbul, then with the first sketch, everything was clear. Another thing that I force myself to do at the beginning of any project is to ask, if possible, just one question, the question. We all know, we are architects, that there is a brief, there are lots of problems and questions to answer, but always I take my time to define the most important problem. And once it is defined, immediately the problem is solved. Instinctively it is solved. Now for that problem, for that case, and of course at the beginning of any project, I discourage my clients waiting something brilliant at the first meeting. I just have plenty of questions to ask them. Second meeting, again, plenty of questions to ask. And I concentrate myself to that one question. And the case here was how to integrate that kind of alien by his lifestyle to the village. In similar cases, there are 2 tendencies. When people from Istanbul or from a big city goes to a village, the first thing is, the populistic way is to get there, to find some local builders. In the Aegean coast of Turkey, it's always somebody who works with stone, and to tell them, okay, what a wonderful, beautiful houses you have in the village. I would like to have one. Please, well, after the deal, let's go and build another one. But because they are not villagers and the way they are living is not the way that that people living in the village, they start deforming the original typology of the village. They go there to contemplate the view, they start changing the proportions of the openings at the facade. This kind of things. The second tendency is to hire an architect from the city. The architect does the drawings with the construction company or with the construction team. They go to the village without any contact to local builders and local people. They do their work, it's done, and the guys goes there for weekends and they go back to the city without having any contact. We tried the third way, saying that, okay, we will be honest, this is not a villager, the guy who will live in this house. Then have to do a fine-tuning between his presence and the villagers. Then we came up with that characteristic section. They were terraces at the land. We fine-tuned the height of the terraces, the depth of the house, and the view angles. And we ended up with a simple cube, having at the extremities of the volume structural elements, concrete structural elements, for not having any disturbing elements between indoor and the view. And we ended up by having an empty volume. We pushed it to the extreme. We even moved the staircase from inside. We took it off. And the discussion we had when I first proposed for not having an indoor staircase to my client, he said, well, it's a good idea. This will make a difference from my apartment in Istanbul. When I will be asleep to get to my room, instead of moving from my living to my room into the corridor, then I will go outdoors and indoors again. Then I will feel that I'm in a village. These are the things that I'm trying to integrate on every project. Instead of concentrating on the tectonics of any building, I always concentrate to create that story. Then, coming back to that construction site visits frequency, once we decided on the empty volume, by pushing to the limits the local building techniques, then 9 meters was the largest openings that they could build. Then, by having exaggerated thickness of structural elements, we decided to concentrate a bit complicated technical parts of the building on one side, which is the back side of the building, that you can see the indoor kitchen, outdoor kitchen, lavatory, and a small storage area. By doing this, first we could have that empty space, and second thing was to control complicated productions, including just the piping and this kind of infrastructure for the lavatories and the kitchens. We could do in one site visit, take control of this kind of complicated part and leave local builders to infill between these defined, technically and precisely defined structural elements. Then that was the main idea, to define the contours and leave people infill them when we were in Istanbul. Then the shutters, the same idea. That you see, this is an aluminium framing, extremely ordinary one, infilled with bamboos that you can easily find very cheap at the village. The same thing with the structural elements. Then you can see we don't have any plaster, any painting, just natural stone filled between the concrete structural elements. And this is the view. That's what the villagers are seeing from the village. Well, I've been asked to design another house in the same village a couple of years later. Friends of my client, once they visited the house, the B2, then they liked so much and they came to me asking to design a house for them, but this time the program was quite different. A couple with 2 children, having frequently friends at home, partying, and this time the dimensions of the building was totally different, contrary to the B2. It's a building making 10 meters by 40. Again, the main idea was to have the view at every point in the building. That's why we had a longitudinal plan. Again, they were terraces at the plots that we redesigned, not changed a lot, but fine-tuned. And we ended up with that building that the villagers, till the last day of the construction, was saying that, Han, you are building an olive oil factory, it's not a house. And I was saying that, and we knew each other for more than 4 years. And I was saying that, believe me, this will be a house. They were saying, no, 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 this will be a factory. And then the problem was how to integrate a building at that scale into the village. Then we came up for commenting on the roof, and we tried to convert the building to a landscape, to a kind of a landscape. This is the view that you have from the village. And instead of having a roughly 500 square meters of tiles, then we use the local stone that you can see at the streets of the village, at the buildings, then all over the village. you see that stone. But this time, considering the scale of the building, we designed a steel prefabricated structure, and again we applied the same technique. Once we built the construction, we let local people to infill with local stone. It's not high-tech at all. It's a very simple roof layering. We have a corrugated metal roof underneath, a very simple metal construction to hold the freestanding stones at the slope, and on both sides of structural elements we have the vertical gutters, and we collect the water, and we have the drainage right at the intersection of the wall with the courtyard. The window framing was produced by the local guy in the village. Coming back to that hyper-specificity, I showed this image to give an idea about my obsessions, which is in this case the alignment of one column with that existing tree. I really try very hard to anchor the building to its proper site. And this is an extreme example. It took a couple of weeks to work with the structural engineer. In case we align this column with the tree, we had to play on the distances between the columns. Every time the distance was changing, the thickness of the column was changing, these kind of things. And I can confess it took roughly 3 weeks to solve the problem. But done. I believe that if you take your time, you can solve everything. And that's why in my professional life with my clients, the strategies that I develop to save some days, sometime to save some hours, is much more tiring than to design a building. But I believe at that strategy, we must find enough time to work on our designs to reach the necessary level of maturity. This is something really that is tiring to me, but this is the only way I can design. Well, this part of the building is kind of working like a cooling tower, because the air is circulating between the freestanding stones at that small patio. Then during the day we have fresh air, and it is circulating all over the building. Well, now we are right at the center, quite at the geometrical center of Anatolia. It's a project that won a competition between 3 architectural offices. It was an invited competition 10 years ago. We are still hoping to find some sponsorship to build it. It is not built. This is a very good example of our design approach. We've been asked to design a museum and a visitor center for the oldest known human settlement in Konya, Çatalhöyük, 10,000 years before Christ. And we had 4 weeks. At the end of the 3rd week, at the office we were so happy. We designed a very well working building, nice looking. Then everything was done, we were happy. The day we started the presentation drawings, I realized that the question was not raised, and of course the solution, the answer was not existing. Then I stopped everything. I do it frequently, saying that let's rethink about everything. Let's stop everything. Do not draw any line. And the question appeared. The site is, as you can see, is right at the center of Anatolian plain. It's a plain. And how can you deal with a plain by a building? By entering an entrance hall of any building, is it possible to go 11 or 12,000 years? It is ridiculous. It appeared immediately ridiculous. And I said, what we have done? We must, instead of designing a building, we must design a journey to the past. This is not the building to design, but the journey. Then, this is the plain. Can you imagine a single building right in the middle of the plain? Then we came up to that scheme because this is a no man's land. You have to go there by a vehicle. And this journey starts when you stop, you park the vehicle. Then you go out, you start going down by a ramp. In a short time, it's a bit, the slope is a bit dynamic. Then you go down, you lose the horizon. You stop there, and there is one shelter that creates some wind, some breeze, and some shadow. Then the light and the microclimate changes. And you have 2 choices. You can keep walking, but at a different speed. You go again up, then you have the horizon, and you are at the right place to visit the archaeological site where they are digging. Or when you are done and you stopped, on your both sides you have the museum. You could first want to visit the museum, see the foundings, and then go to the site. This is a choice. Or at the other side, there is the museum shop, coffee shop, and then the institute for the research. And the cross-section, the museum on the right-hand side, it's a simple, banal, concrete vault, that's what we have, and that's all we have in the plain. And these are the sites where they are digging. They will dig another 10 or 15 years. Then we have always time to find a sponsorship and build it. Well, now we are in Istanbul, very nearby the Galata Bridge. 5 or 6 years ago, we've been asked to design, to convert 2 late 19th century buildings in the center of Istanbul to a cultural center. One which is the former headquarters of Ottoman Bank, which was the central bank of the Ottoman Empire, built by the French architect Alexandre Vallori. And the second building is at a walking distance at the pedestrian streets linking Taksim Square to Tünel Square. The challenging part of this project was to design 2 spaces for one cultural program. Then again, the issue of dialoguing, having some functions in one building, others in the other one, and finding ways of connecting them was the challenge of the project. The building has a very interesting facade approach, which is the facade looking the Golden Horn is treated in a much more oriental way, and the main facade, where the main entrance is located, is much more occidental. Well, when we were asked to convert these 2 buildings, I will show later on the second one, we said, okay, this will be a one cultural program, but being specific to each of the buildings, we must define 2 questions, one for each. And the question was, for this building, how to integrate people to a bank headquarters, because by its nature, the building was so secured and introverted. with huge safe rooms, then you can imagine this is the central bank of an empire. Then it is not easy for people to get in. Or this will be a cultural center free of charge for anybody. Then this will be converted to the other extreme. This will be a public space. Anybody can enter the building and make use of any part of the building. That was the question. Thus, and the building is beautiful. We concentrated on, instead of creating new spaces, we concentrated on creating a new circulation inside the building. That was the problem. And we worked very hard to understand what we have in our hands, how it was built originally, because the architect of the building intervened on the building several times. When we worked together with specialists on restoration, we have seen that there are 5 phases of the building by its original architect. And then we detected, it was not difficult to detect, but we detected the parts they added or the parts they deformed the original spaces. The first thing was the elevator that they added right at the center of the entrance, that was blocking the view on that beautiful staircase, blocking the natural lights coming from the windows and blocking physically the circulation in the building. The second thing was that slab they added on top of the atrium, blocking the natural light, the zenithal light. To save some space, they added a slab. And we started taking off this kind of things. I showed this matrix to just show another part of our design methodology. Of course, when you design from the scratch, you can control too many things from the beginning of the project. But when you intervene on an existing building, and if it is a listed building, that you are extremely limited about your interventions, when, of course, you complete the project, and the construction, not really the construction phase starts, but to get some examples, you do some sondage, this kind of things. You discover parts of the buildings that you can't intervene, you can't touch. And you must go back to your drawings and redesign the space. But what we do is always, at any time that we have a minor problem at any part of the building, just at that corner, for example, instead of solving the problem by concentrated on that corner, we go back to the beginning. We restart rethinking the whole building. And we always solve the problem when we do that. In case we try to solve the problem saying that, okay, then you can push it 20 centimeters or this kind of things, it never works. For us, it never works. Then we had these series of complete projects to reach that degree of maturity of the design. And just to compare, we moved the elevator to exaggerate the entrance hall, because we decided to integrate the extension building to the main building. Then by moving the elevator, we could free the circulation right at the entrance. We recreated the courtyard between the main building and the extension building. And we just added a second layer of glass wall next to the existing wall to solve a series of problems. We could have the new entrances to new functions. Now we could have all the new entrances inside the building on that glass facade. We could make use of it as a kind of a media wall to, by using the screens to announce the events, this kind of things, to show the original texture of the wall without any plaster. You know, when you do this kind of interventions, when everything is finished, nobody is able to see what was the originally the original shape of the building. Then it's like a window that we make use of it. The part of the small sculptures, the lower part is the original, not restored part of the sculptures. Then the upper part is the restored part. Then everybody can compare before and after. And of course, we reintegrated the daylight. That changed drastically the perception of the space. Of course, new elevators. Can you imagine the original elevator was right at the center of this beautiful staircase. The courtyard that we recreated. Well, the second SALT project, the same program, the other late 19th century building. Again in this building, the problem was about circulation, but here the main thing was the circulation, because this is the main pedestrian street of the city, that you have roughly 1 million passers-by daily. During weekends, we have 3 million people. And then we try to get the flows first from the street inside the building and find a way to circulate them vertically in the building. Well, this is a lighting installation done by Jan van Lierde, the architect and lighting designer, who did a similar thing in South Galata as well. Maybe you have seen it at the courtyard. There are this kind of motorized, computer motorized, rotating sheets of colored glass, reflecting the daylight all over the building. Then, of course, new structural reinforcements, the staircase added, the original staircase that we integrated the new staircase and the existing for creating a totally new circulation. This time we are not in Istanbul but at an industrial park nearby Istanbul. This case was to build an administrative building, an office building, for one of the biggest steel construction factory in Turkey. I think they are one of the biggest in Europe as well. This is the plot, a huge plot, and we've been asked to design the building, but before we've been asked to discuss with people to find the right place for the new administrative building. And we ended up by deciding to go to one extremity of the plot at the really to the limit, to the borders, that you can see the narrow part of the building, in order to liberate the space in front of the building where they were collecting all the beautiful steel structures before shipment. Then every time I went to the factory before starting the project, just for a couple of meetings, I have seen huge, beautiful steel construction elements, like sculptures. And then we decided to not touching that space and localize the new building in which the engineers are working in order to create them that view. Then they design structures, they are produced, and before shipment they have in front of them all these beautiful pieces. Then it's an all transparent building, of course steel and glass. And again, very ordinary facades with extremely basic elements, aluminium framing, nothing high-tech, but just to take enough time to develop the proportions, thickness of the elements, distances of one element to the other. I'm working on that. the collaboration between the structural engineer and our team was really a fun. Another scale, a temporary pavilion in France, in Paris, at Jardin des Tuileries. 2010 was the Turkish year in France, and I've been asked to design a temporary pavilion at the gardens of Musée du Louvre. It was a pavilion built just for 3 weeks. Then we had 4 weeks to fix it and to move it. They were planned to have extremely different functions in that pavilion. So we said that, okay, we must create just a shelter. But by doing this, the trick was the budget was allowing us to build at a maximum 400 square meters of construction. But the need was larger than that. In order to build or to make use of a larger space, we split in two and we created kind of a courtyard between the two pavilions, and then we could make use of 600 square meters. We exaggerated to its limit the use of the land. Then it was a simple trick, a simple construction, and they had more than 100 different events during these 3 weeks. Another late 19th century building intervention, we've been asked to convert a listed building in Istanbul right in front of Galata Bridge, Galata Tower, for a family having one of the largest contemporary arts collection in Istanbul, in Turkey. This is a building first for that collection, for partying sometime. One part is kind of a guest house. Well, there are guest rooms for their friends visiting Istanbul, and a library. That's the functions. I would like to go back to that scheme. I always solve problems at the sections. I'm obsessed with section. Once I draw a section, everything is solved. Then we had an anecdote when I was for the first time asked to intervene on that building. My client told me, Han, we bought a beautiful building. The building was in not a good shape, but a beautiful building. But it has a problem. Then I said, what's the problem? He said, the Galata Tower is blocking the view on Topkapı Palace. And then I understood everything. Then I said, okay, it's a big deal to me. Very, very precious location. When we started on discussing with them and how to fix the program, this kind of things. When we analyze the building, we have seen that the front parts, one part of the building facing the Galata Tower and the wonderful view on the Topkapı Palace, was internally organized as a primary space, of course. But the second half, the back part of the building, was really a secondary space without any daylight, very poor daylight, very uncomfortably proportioned rooms. Then I proposed saying that let's keep one room at each floor and create a vertical garden on the back part of the building. Then we have one verticality in one part of the building, and at the back part we have another verticality that we created. Then we will have two verticality to look on. And I collaborated with Patrick Blanc, maybe you know him, the French specialist on vertical gardens, who collaborated with Jean Nouvel for the Quai Branly building in Paris and Kitesurf Forum in Madrid with Herzog de Meuron. Then this is the untouched, protected part of the building, and the preserved original staircase, and the part that we hardly intervene is starting. Then we created a double height volume for the library and the vertical garden. And again, about my collaboration with engineers, the grid that you see on the right-hand side of the courtyard is full of the infrastructure of the air conditioning and this kind of things. Right from the beginning of the design, we located them right there. Voila, the view blocked by the Galata Tower. What a problem. Okay, I'm about to finish. A competition that we couldn't win. It's in Istanbul, very nearby Taksim Park, at the center of the city. We've been four to compete: Grimshaw, Snohetta, Dealers Cofidio, and my team. This is a contemporary arts museum. The plot is at a very critical location. It is where the scale of the urban tissue is changing, right at that very critical point. Then at the historical map dating from the early 20th century, you can easily see the large plots became industrial plots during 50s and 60s, and our problem was to design a building which will be able to control, to manage that difference of scale. Then coming from big plots and big buildings, creating, that's why we split into the building, creating an inner street, playing on the scales of the two parts of the building, and the motto was to enter the museum without entering the building. Of course, people who would like to enter the building can easily have an access to the building, but considering the social tissue of neighboring people, a modern art museum will be for more than 5 or 6 or 7 years with surrounding people. There will be not a clash, but people will not feel familiar to what is happening in that museum. Then we said, if daily they cross the inner streets and they see what is happening there, this can help a lot to create a familiarity with the function. Then that was the main idea. Of course, the circulation was one of the key elements for liberating the inside of the building of the facade. We took it to the facade, and the small part of the building is the museum shop, cafe, and some of the temporary galleries. Again in Istanbul, this time the former power plant of the Ottoman Empire converted to a museum for energy. The building was not in use for more than 20 years when we've been asked to convert it to a museum. This is now a private university's campus called Central Istanbul, Bilgi University campus, where I am teaching. That was the shape of the building when we just entered for the first time. And this time the problem was to integrate people to that space which is not designed for people. It was just a shelter to that beautiful machinery. Then beautiful turbines. We have 5 turbines there. And the building was not having a proper entrance. Then you were opening a door making 2 meters high, and you were shocked by that height of the structure, doing more than 20 meters, seeing all those turbines on platforms on 7 or 6 meters high. It was like Gotham City, and not an entrance. Then, just a simple touch, we suspended a pathway at a critical height that everybody could see the turbines that became kind of a landscape because they were not functioning. It was just to look at. And the height of that pathway was connected to the only part of the building in which people were working, the control room. Then that's the pathway we created. And you go up by escalators, you go straight, seeing the turbines, having the information screens on the balustrade. Then you go straight to the control room, and you have two choices, like Çatalhöyük project. If you want to get closer to the turbines, then you are connected to the existing uncomfortable technical maintenance network. Then there are very uncomfortable stairs, series of stairs. Then you can get very close to the turbines, or you take the elevator outside of the building, right at the extremity, and then you go down and you leave the building. That's all we have done. And you can compare the completed building to that sketch in which our intervention was much more visible. When I started to spend some time at the site, I like I have done in Çatalhöyük project, I said how you can deal with some tricks on a balustrade with that huge space. Then I said being invisible will be much better. That's why you can just see the reflections of the glass sheets that we had on our pathway. Right, the one before the end. We are in Ulaanbaatar. This is Ulaanbaatar. Then how to anchor the building. Then you must find a way. Well, we've been asked to design the Turkish embassy in Ulaanbaatar. Again, in case we concentrated on the functions of the building and of course to the sites, we could solve this problem of a city without any interesting or attractive character. Then we designed an introverted building, creating a courtyard and creating a series of enfilades between the spaces. This was our first building in which the problem of identity could be a dangerous thing. Then, you know, this is the Turkish embassy in Ulaanbaatar. And what is Turkish? Then, to be honest, at the beginning of the project, it was a deal. But I said, this is not the way. Now, we can't say that we will design a Turkish building. What does it mean? Okay, then let's concentrate on the brief, on the program. And an embassy, that I learned that an embassy is nothing more than a house. It's the official house of the ambassador, but as a function, the first floor is an ordinary house that a family lives in it. But the ground floor has other functions, formal receptions, this kind of things. And then, on concentrating on these functions, how an ambassador comes in, where his driver stops the car, the dimension of the drop-off. When there is a reception, there are more than 300 people in a room or in a floor, how to manage them. These kind of things helped a lot to solve this problem of, let's not say identity, but of presence. And we came up with this courtyard building with a pitched roof, but at a distance when you look, you can say that, well, it's a reinterpretation of a classical Turkish house. But if you look closer, then you see that at the edge of the roof, the form of the roof, because it's a very cold place during the winter and very hot during summer. Then the shape and dimensions of the roof are functional. Then the structure, the repetition, the rhythm of the structural elements is based on to diminish the section of the columns. Then there are plenty of rational thinking on that. Well, the last project that I will show you tonight, it's a project under construction. It will be finished by the end of 2017. This is the Turkish mission buildings in Strasbourg, France. A complex of 4 buildings making roughly 10,000 square meters in a very beautiful setting in front of the European Parliament, next to the Human Rights Court, by the canal. Then we have a building for the permanent delegation to the European Council, the consulate building, the residence for the consulate, and the consular services building. Then again playing with the section, instead of having a series of walls to secure our borders, we propose to lift the buildings, and at that plinth that we create by lifting the buildings, we could have all the infrastructures for 4 different buildings, the common infrastructure, and we could easily technically solve too many problems and securing the buildings. Then that was the first idea, to lift them up. And again, to create the largest empty volumes in order to allow, by the time, to change the partitioning of the office buildings. Then you can see this is the ground floor. You can see the small service parts of the building on back of the building, but paradoxically the entrance facade of the building, and we have a series of empty spaces. Then to integrate the building to the city, we are making use of the local stone. This is a sandstone called Grès de Vosges. The stone that has been used in the historical buildings of the city, and the cathedral was built by that stone. But what we are doing is, by using this traditional material with the help of the contemporary technologies, we are using the largest dimensions in history, making 90 centimeters by 2 meters and 90. Huge pieces of stones. Then by texture and color it is familiar, but by the exaggerated dimensions it's something new. And we make use of Grès de Vosges for the facades facing the city, and the facade facing the protocol entrance is all transparent, but the service towers are covered with Iznik tiles, the traditional hand-painted tiles produced during the Ottoman period, but originating from the Byzantine Empire. Then, like Alexandre Vallory's building, we have in one facade quite a different architectural attitude than the other facades. And this is the view from the park facing the plot. Thank you very much. That's all.